We're happy to have Edoardo today presenting his job market paper on the political consequences of mass repatriation. So the floor is yours.
Thanks. So my name is Edoardo Cefalà. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Nottingham. So the title of the paper is The Political Consequences of Mass Repatriation. It's my job market paper. So imagine to parachute hundreds of thousands of new voters in a country. What would be the effect on the political system? And how would parties adjust their strategies in response to such an event? So several studies try to answer these questions using mainly episodes of franchise extension. One issue with that is that the franchise extension happens gradually over time. You need a group of people who are in the population who is excluded from the voting rights. Also, parties have already an historical position on this issue, and they may also have time to adjust to the extension of the franchise. In this paper, I'm leveraging a different mechanism. It is the one of the sudden and unexpected increase in the voting population stemming from the mass repatriation of citizens. So I'm looking at people from outside entering the country and then being able to vote. Because of that, this study bridges a link between the literature on the political impact of immigration and the literature on the extension of the voting franchise. And also, this study shows how extreme single-issue parties may gain influence in the political process by influencing the agenda of mainstream parties. And I will show you in particular a topical mechanism of party strategy where far-right parties exploit issues associated with these people, and then the other mainstream parties started to talk about the same issues after that. Just to give you a preview of the results, I'm exploiting a quasi-experiment, which is represented by the arrival in France of 1 million repatriates after the Algerian independence in 1962. What I find is that turnout increased in the elections throughout this period. Also, far-right parties' vote share increased, and center-right parties' vote share decreased in those elections. In terms of party strategy, I'm showing that far-right parties behaved as political entrepreneurs, and then the other parties followed. So far-right parties talk about issues related to these repatriates before all the others, and then the other parties followed over time, such that in the end, radical proposals became mainstream. And then I'm showing that the larger the exposure to the arrival of the repatriates, the larger the space dedicated in the political manifestos. So the idea is, in this case, that a manifesto is a document which is limited in space. So what you want to do is to choose the words that are maximizing your votes. And in particular, in areas where there are more of these people, you are more likely to talk about these people because you want their votes. In areas where these people represent a small share of the electorate, then you may want to use the space in these manifestos for other important issues. Very briefly, that's the outline. I will first introduce a little bit about the history to understand the event. Then I will talk about data on the elections, the empirical strategy, and the results. And then in the second part of this talk, I will look at the political manifestos, looking at the data, and then these two mechanisms I mentioned previously, and then I will conclude. So just to give you a little bit of detail about history, why there were people from Algeria who moved to France? Well, because in 1830, Algeria was colonized by France. Important thing for the story is that French citizenship was accorded to anyone who was born in Algeria and had European origin. Also, another important fact is that there was a stark difference between the Muslim population in Algeria and the people with European origins, so the colonizers, which then led to the rebellion of the Muslim population against the colonizers and started the Algerian Civil War. Important point also, during this period, de Gaulle became the Prime Minister of France. This is in 1958. And also, immediately after being appointed as the new Prime Minister, de Gaulle traveled to Algeria. And there is this famous speech, so je vous ai compris, so I've understood you. It's an important speech because de Gaulle, with this speech, he seemed in favor of keeping Algeria as a French colony. And for the people of European origins, this is exactly what de Gaulle wanted to do with this speech. So saying Algeria will stay French. But then he started to change, let's say he changed his mind. He started to talk with the Algerian provisional government and found an agreement with the Algerian provisional government on the 18th March 1962, the so-called Evian's agreement or Evian Accord. And then on the 8th of April 1962, there is a referendum in France which granted independence to Algeria, where 91% of the French people voted in favor of the independence. Okay, so what happens after that? What happens after that is that the people with European origins started to move back, or better, not even to move back, started to move in France. So we are talking about 600,000 repatriates, which moved to France between March and December 1962. And then you have the remaining 350,000 between 63 and 68. So the vast majority moved immediately, so immediately after the referendum. And if you want to have a visual representation of this, that's the growth rate of the population in France between 1951 and 2012. And you can immediately spot when this event took place. This incredible spike in the growth rate of the population, which will never happen again. So this is why I would say this is an important event, not only for France and let's say historically, but also because of how important this is. It is important to, because it can be used to answer to important political questions.
Can I ask?
Is there
yeah, I think you were going to go there, but this you're speaking about repatriates, right? There are also other that moved that didn't have the French nationality.
Yes, there were some immigrants. Also, there were people who also had the French nationality, but they were Muslims, so the so-called Arki in the same period. Yes. Yeah,
but they don't, after the independence, they will not have by default the nationality in the same way that the
no, exactly.
So here you're not differentiating, right?
Yeah. No, I can look at them because they are called Algerian Muslim. So and they have the nationality, and yeah. I can look at them. Yes, but they are not here basically. Well, in this case, maybe some of them, but not that many. Also, it's more complicated because they had the nationality, but apparently some people did not recognize it. They say, well, you are national, you are a French national, but you are not exactly, you have to apply again for it. So it's complicated. So why these people move? Well, because there were attacks against civilians, also seizures of property. So these people cannot stay in Algeria anymore. So they had to leave. Where these people, so when they moved, they arrived in France, where these people settle? Well, they settled in warmer areas of the south of France, where the climate was similar to the one they were used in Algeria. And here I report a quote from a Pied Noir interview in 2012 of a Pied Noir who was saying why he moved to the south of France. And just to give you an idea, that's the share of Pied Noir. And that's one thing, I'm calling Pied Noir the repatriates, because when these repatriates will arrive in France, they will be called Pied Noir, okay, just to be more precise. And so I'm showing the share of Pied Noir with respect to the 1962 population and the average temperature by department. And I will use these as an instrument for their distribution. Yeah, is there a question?
Yeah, maybe you will get to this later. I wanted to know about this Pied Noir, right? So do we need to think about the natives in France when we will think later about the political outcomes, or about the Pied Noir? Because at the beginning of introduction, you said that this is different from enfranchisement because this is an outer group that is in the country. So you are selling this as like, we are bringing people in as if nothing else has happened, but these people have been through a civil war, right? And like hundreds of thousands of people have died, right? And they are gonna presumably maybe change their attitudes and their voting later on. Right. So I'm just thinking how the context influenced the behavior of the Pied Noir once they are back in France and they can vote.
Yeah, so the story will be exactly about that, about how these people will affect the election. I cannot say exactly only them, because you can think that also natives can have change in behavior, but let's say I can show you that the results are likely to be driven also by them. Okay.
Can I also just jump in on this? So on the map you show with France and the temperature on one side and the settlement on the other side, isn't this just distance as well somehow?
I can control for distance. Yeah, I can. Yeah, it can be distance, but at the same time, you know, let's say historians, and also I have this quote where basically, you know, they moved because let's say they moved in the areas where which was similar to Algeria also in terms of climate. But it's true that they also arrived in Marseille and things like that, and so. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, so very briefly, I said that this was an important event, was sudden and unexpected. Just to back up these claims, before the referendum, so the vast majority moved after the referendum in April. Before the referendum, basically the government had only one liner, one boat from Algiers to France to move these people. Also, and then they started to increase only after the referendum. Also, the government predicted a maximum inflow of 100,000 people per year for 3 years. And instead, as I show you, 600,000 move in few months. So the government was unprepared. It was completely unexpected, at least in terms of magnitude. And in fact, when these people move, because the government was unprepared, they had to bring all the people they could. They say, okay, you can move, but when you travel, you are allowed to bring with you only 2 suitcases per person. Or just to give you an idea, that's a Pied-Noir family. And you can see, so this photo was shot in August 62. You can see probably the father of this kid wearing 2 coats in August. Why? Well, because they were allowed to bring with them only 2 suitcases per person. So it was saving space for other things. Okay, this is why I was putting the coats in August. Why this is important? It is important because when these people left Algeria, they lost everything they had, almost everything, and in particular, you know, all the properties. So when they arrived in France, they will start to ask for the compensation or indemnisation. And you will see that this will be an important topic, in particular in the political manifestos. Also, these people were French citizens and they were voters. So they could immediately vote in the French elections. What is my expectations in terms of voting? Well, if you read any interview to these people, you will see that they consider de Gaulle as a traitor. It's incredible. You always see that. You always see this word in an interview with these people. De Gaulle is a traitor because he first said one thing and then he changed his mind. And also, these people had some connection with far-right parties which started during the Algerian Civil War. And also, I will show you in the paper that the far-right parties were the most receptive to these people. They were the first one to say, we are going to compensate you. We're going to give you the indemnisation. So I'm also expecting an increase in the vote for far-right parties because of the arrival of these people. But in this case is, let's say, with a direct effect of these people. It's not like a backlash against. Okay, in this case will be these people who had this connection with far-right parties. So in terms of data, I need a measure of exposure of arrival. So
just a quick question on this.
Yes.
Before you move on. So to connect with Jasna's point, she said that other like Maslin, the Harkis have come as well, right? And these guys may not be eligible for indemnisation, right? And these may be people that actually the far-right voters dislike, right? So when you have this data, well, that you're going to talk now, like, but is there any way of separating like the true French, so to speak, that the other migrants that came from Algeria? Because this may drive voting in opposing directions a priori.
I can control, and I do. I also have a placebo, and I also use it as an additional control, the share of, so the inflow of immigrants from Maghreb in the same period. And I can also add to this the people who moved from Algeria and also the French citizenship, but which were Muslim. But bear in mind that the people who moved from Algeria and were Muslim, these people, which will be called Arki, they moved because they couldn't stay in Algeria anymore because they fight along with the French army, okay? So let's say, yeah, you can think that maybe the far-right didn't like these people, but still these people, they fought along with the French army against the Algerian one. So, but I can control for this as an additional check, yes.
Just a point, so This is the French census, right? I'm not sure how you can see the Muslims, Algerians. In my mind, you cannot distinguish between the two. Is that so?
There is a variable where there is the nationality, and
yeah,
they have like Algerian Muslims written in the in the 1968 census. You have this.
Okay, thanks.
If I can only ask one question.
Yes.
So I assume that when those people had still like a citizenship, but when they were living in Algeria, they were not allowed to vote in the election. Yes, is that correct?
So the people who were the citizenship, no, they were allowed to vote immediately because they had to register 6 months early, but in this case, they were allowed immediately.
But before they were not voting?
No, they were voting, but in the Algerian elections, which was able to elect some people, I think it was around 30 to 40 seats at the National Assembly.
But can you tell, like, looking at the outcomes of those voting in Algeria, can you tell something about the potential political preferences of these people? Because I couldn't imagine that, you know, there were also some parties and there were also right, left, and something like that.
It's difficult because the last election in Algeria was in 58. And in 58, apparently these people were more in favor of de Gaulle. But then de Gaulle changed his mind after 58, you see? So that's one, it's not easy to say exactly, you know, because then they were expecting to stay there in Algeria. In Algeria, there was still French, and then they had to leave. So this probably shifted the political preferences. This is why historians claim, well, they started to become more far-right during the last years of the Civil War, okay? So in terms of data, in 1968 French census, I construct a measure of exposure of the 88 French departments to the Pied Noir arrival. How do I know if a person is a Pied Noir or not? Well, I use the 1968 census. If this person was in Algeria in 62, had the French citizenship, and entered in France between March 62 and December 68, then this person is a Pied Noir, okay? That's the way in which I construct this measure. So, and then my measure of exposure will be basically the number of Pied Noir in different Department J, Region R, time S, whereas between 62 and 68, divided by the department population in 1962. Just to give you an idea, we have between 0.3% to almost 10% increase in the population throughout this period. So for example, in the VAR, the arrival of these people will increase the population, let's say, the Pied Noir will represent 10% of the population in 62. So a pretty big shock, in particular in some areas. In terms of control, I used the 1962 French census, which was collected before the arrival of these people. I have information on productive structures, employment in different sectors, the human capital, so basically the share of people with baccalaureate. And then I'm controlling for the pre-existing exposure to immigration of the different French departments before the arrival of these people, which can capture already some, maybe can have effect on political attitudes, and also can, can control if, for example, those areas are more used to having people from outside. And then in terms of election, I'm using all the national elections, legislative and presidential between 58 and 1974. Since parties change over time, I will have to match them to their political ideology. So in particular, I will focus only on center-right parties and far-right parties, at least for this part. And then I will focus on the first round of the elections, okay? Because then, you know, there are all the parties and then less strategic voting. So what's the empirical specification? I want to explain I will look only at the post period, let's say, so when these people arrived, and I want to explain the vote, or let's say turnout and the vote share for right and center right, with the sum of the share of Pied Noir who settle in the different areas at each point in time, so at each election. I will always control for the pre-arrival turnout or vote share for center right and far right. I will control for the 62 characteristics. So again, before the arrival of these people, I have region fixed effects and year fixed effects. And standard errors are clustered at the department level. So what I'm interested in is this parameter beta 1, which represent the increase or decrease in the vote share or in turnout with respect to the 1958 that is caused by the arrival of these people. So that's the strategy. Clearly, I use the word caused, and to claim causality, first I need to address one important issue, that is the fact that these people can sort wherever they want. They arrive in one area, but then they can go in different areas. So I need to instrument their location choice, and I'm doing it by using average temperature by department, as I already mentioned at the beginning. Just to give you an idea of these, that's the predicted share of Pinot Noir using average temperature. That's the actual share of Pinot Noir. And so the two measures are strongly correlated. So this basically is my first stage. But then, since we are talking about instrument, the main issue there is the key identifying assumption, that is average temperature should influence the vote share only through the arrival of these people. So what I'm doing is this. I'm showing that average temperature is not correlated with the vote for turnout for right and right before the arrival of these people. So in the different elections before the arrival of these people. So just to give you an idea, turnout in the different years, center right in the different years, and far right in different years, without 51, because there is no candidate in 51, is uncorrelated with average temperature, meaning that temperature does not explain the vote for these parties before the arrival of these people. And I'm also showing you that it's not only the levels, but also in trends, you have the same. So if you look at the change of 2 consecutive elections, you basically have the same thing. So average temperature is uncorrelated with the change in political preferences for those parties, meaning that those warmer areas, let's say, were not becoming more in favor of one party or the other. Okay, so I can show you
just to understand.
Yes.
Before all this happening, all this mass repatriation,
yes,
was the far right largely present in the election? Were they getting any vote, or they were just marginal? So can you give us a sense of how many people were voting?
No, they were getting votes. In particular, when there was, I would say probably in 56, they were getting votes already. Also, yeah, in 58. So you have also, let's say, far right / populist, let's say, because while you have more fascist parties, or let's say post-fascist parties, which were smaller, but yeah, you have the Pujadist party in particular was present and was getting votes.
And do you have any evidence regarding whether some of these Pinot Noir actually, well, this is a bit of like a curiosity, I'm sorry, but if these guys got involved in politics and joined like these far-right parties, or like, you know, any other?
Yes, Candidato Front National Uni, that's a Pujadist parties. And you have Le Rassemblement National des Français Repatriés, directly casting a candidate for the far right, already in 62.
Yeah, I think that's important. You could tell us a bit about this, like while you are telling your historical background.
It's only one example, so, you know, but still it is true that you have, and also there are anecdotal evidence saying that important Pinot Noir were in favor of the far right. And that's one example, for example. This was a manifesto to be, okay. So in terms of result, I want first to start from.
Sorry, if I may ask you, when did the far right parties started to announce that they were started to promise this compensation? When was that?
Immediately, in 1962, they were basically the only one talking about that, or more than that. Yeah, more than everyone else. Yes.
Okay. More than everyone else, or,
yes.
or only them?
No, I would say more than everyone else, but the other were very, very small. So you will see. I can show you then the graphs.
Okay, thank you.
Because I have to do things faster a little bit. So what are the results? First, increasing turnout. This is in the legislative election, 62 to 73. Also, same thing in the presidential elections. If you look at the EV, so a 1% increase in the share of Pinot Noir causes an increase in turnout of, in both cases, around 0.55, let's say. And I can show you, unfortunately, time is running very fast, but I can show you that these people voted. So there is anecdotal evidence that the Pied Noir, for example, voted Tixevignancourt, who was the presidential candidate for the far right in 65. I show you already the manifesto. I can also show you that if you look at the change in turnout in the referendum, the one on the Algerian independence, in the same areas, turnout did not increase, okay? So basically, turnout did not increase in between 58 and the referendum in April in those areas. But then when these people actually arrived in this period, turnout increased. So this is likely to be due to the arrival of these people, okay? And if that's the case, then now I can talk about the political preferences, which are then, let's say, likely to be driven, not entirely, and I want to be clear about that, will not be entirely driven by the Pied Noir, because the natives can still vote, clearly. But the fact that turnout increase and this is likely to be driven by the Pied Noir means that also these results are likely to be driven partially by the arrival of these people. And what I'm finding is decrease in the vote for center-right parties as expected, and an increase in the vote for far-right parties in the legislative election 62 to 73, and also for center-right, again, negative in the presidential elections, and for far-right positive in the presidential elections in that period.
I'm sorry, so, how many were the Pied Noir as a share of total voters, and what is the scale of these coefficients here?
So, yes, that's 1% increase. That's very textbook kind of 1% increase give rise to this. And they were around, they were 2% of the population. So in terms of voters, they should be probably is around 1.3, if I'm wrong. And yeah, as an additional check, I also, since I have the individual level characteristics because of the census, I can also look only the one who are eligible voters. So the one who are older than 21 and can vote. This is what a robustness check that I do. Okay.
Can I ask one question, Mark?
Yes, please.
So, like one thing, do you look also on voting for left and far left parties, in the sense that do we observe here polarization, or we observe kind of movement of the voting of the society from left to the right? Because both options are possible, yeah.
No, yeah, I don't see that. I see probably in the legislative election, in some cases, I observe a decrease in the far left, but that's the only other result that I find. Yes, I don't see polarization on others.
So it's rather movement to the right.
Yeah, no, I see that, yeah, there is an increase in far right, and also I observe this increase in center right, at least in the first round, yes. I don't see polarization or others. Okay, so as expected, the arrival of these people caused an increase in turnout in the vote share for far-right parties and a decrease in the vote for center-right parties. I have different robustness check, the placebo and so on, calling standard errors. But I wanted, if I can, I wanted to show you the second part of the paper. So the one on the political manifestos. So what about the supply side? So how parties' strategy change after the arrival of these people? Because, you know, there are now this new group of voters entering in the country who can vote, who also have some specific issues. So how parties are going to react to that? Let me go directly here.
Yeah, you have about 10 minutes, by the way.
Yes, okay. Yeah, then I should be fine. So I will show you that far-right parties behave as political entrepreneurs. So they start to devote space of the political manifesto to the Pied Noir before all the other parties, and then the other parties will follow over time. So they will mimic the strategy, they will talk about the same issue, but slightly later on. Maybe, you know, only the election after, but they will start after. And also I will show you that the Pied Noir causes a shift in the strategy of the different parties, and this shift is stronger the larger the sharing in area. So very easily, where these people settle, parties tend to talk more about it, independent from their ideology. So how to measure a shift in political strategy? I export data on more than 10,000 political manifestos. These are single political manifestos which are issued between 1958 and 1973 in all the legislative elections. I already show you a manifesto. A manifesto is a document, 2-page document where you have the date of the election, you have the area where the election, where the manifesto has been issued, and then you have name of the party or name of the candidate, and then you have all the proposals. I have 10,000 of them because they are the electoral district. I first use text analysis to calculate for each document the term frequencies for some specific words that are associated with these people. And then I also have to match them to the geographical level of that I'm using that are the departments. So I will have to take averages to get to there. What are the words that I'm using? What are the things which are the issues associated with these people? So I'm focusing on some specific words. Algérie, because they come from Algeria. Rapatrier, because they are repatriates. Indemnisation, so compensation. And amnesty. I haven't talked about that, but some of these people were members of the army, and some of these people committed crimes during the Algerian Civil War. So they started to ask for the amnesty of those crimes. So Giuseppe, you also asked me about the word indemnisation. You can see that this is in 58. You can see that this is basically 0 for everyone else that is not the far right. Okay. And you can see that the far right tend to move first. They tend to move immediately in 62 and talk about these words more than the others immediately in 62. And then over time, the other parties tend to follow. They tend to also to catch up and to talk about the same issues. One different, let's say, one different behavior is here is with the word amnesty, which seems to be seems to be salient in 67. The explanation that I have for this is that in 66, there was a law passed granting amnesty, which was probably not enough for these people. So this new law leads to this saliency of this issue. And in 68, there is a law granting amnesty for those people, which is in the title of the law. And then once the law is passed, that's basically a dead issue. That's not an issue anymore, okay? But this is how this works in this manifesto. This is the, you can think of it as the space that parties dedicate to this issue in the manifestos over time. What I'm doing in this case, I'm comparing within the same department the use of these words by the far right against the other. So this is a simple dummy 0-1, and I'm comparing over time the difference in the use of these words between the far right and the other parties, okay? And so what I'm showing you is this, that in 62 in particular, this difference tend to be at the maximum. So the far right is talking more about this issue and is exploiting this group before all the others, and then this tends to go down over time. Even becoming not significant anymore. Also, in some cases, because the far right is talking a little bit less, but also because the other parties are catching up. They are saying, okay, this is a group of voters. We also want to talk about this. We also want to say, okay, we know that these are some important issue. We can solve them, okay? And this is something which happened over time. And one last thing, probably you should be already convinced that this behavior was caused by the arrival of these people because these words were associated with these people. But just to be more precise, what I'm showing you now is the exposure below the median exposure to the arrival of these people and above the median exposure. And I'm showing you how these words are used in the area below and above by these different parties, okay? And as you can see, the larger is the share of, let's say, above the median exposure. If you look at single parties, probably with the only exception of far left in this case, you see that parties tend to talk more about this issue in areas where these people are more present, okay? So what I'm doing now is this. I want to show that in the area where these people settle, parties independent from political ideology in the end tended to talk more about this issue. They started to say, okay, we want to give compensation to them. We want to give amnesty. So I'm using the same empirical strategy I used previously. This time, instead of looking at vote share, I'm looking at the share of these single words. I'm putting all the parties together, but I'm capturing different political ideology with ideology fixed effects. And what I'm finding is that, again, this is 1% increase in the share of Pinot Noir causes an increase in the space, if you want, of these manifestos, or of the use of these words of 0.01% and so on. That's the interpretation. But you can see that in the areas where these people settle, the larger is the exposure and the more parties independent from political ideology are talking about those issues. And which I find very interesting. For example, indemnizazione can make sense, but amnesty, you can think of it as a very far right policy, you see, and still is there.
So do you know if some of these Pied Noirs also joined other parties? In that case, it wouldn't be independent of political ideology anymore.
No, I don't see that. So I don't see in the manifestos, I don't know if some normal citizens then join other parties. This is something I cannot observe, or at least I don't know. Yes. But the idea is that, in particular, at the beginning, these people were already a disconnection with far-right movements, and then the far-right was the first one, the more receptive one, to say, okay, this is our core, not the core electorate, but we want to give them. And yeah, there are also sociological analysis nowadays of the mindset of these people, which, if you are interested, we can talk about it. Okay, so again, just to comment this part, so far-right parties behave as political entrepreneurs so that they force then all the other parties to move in the same direction. Also, larger the exposure and the more parties talk about it. I have several robustness check. Again, the placebo, winsorization, and I can look at the eligible Pinot Noir, because so far I haven't looked at all the Pinot Noir settled, not only the one who can vote. But to conclude, so the arrival of 1 million repatriates from Algeria affected French political life, both in the short run and the long run, even though I don't have time to show you, but if you're interested, I can. They influenced especially the vote for far-right parties. And as I showed you, these far-right parties behaved as a political entrepreneur and forced all the other parties to move in the same direction, such that with radical proposals that were associated with the far right, then started to be adopted by mainstream parties and became mainstream. And I'm arguing that this is still a very important mechanism nowadays to understand radical right strategy. For example, if you think about immigration and how issues related to immigration then can be used by mainstream parties in a similar way to far right. And there are papers showing this, how the political entrepreneurship of niche parties then influence the mainstream. And yeah, thank you very much.
Right, thanks. You were perfectly on time. There is a question from the chat and then a couple of questions from the panelists. So Marley was asking whether far-right parties run in all constituencies. And then maybe Martin can take the...
Okay. Not in all constituencies, no. They were running in some of them, 20 or 30. This is also why I'm, in particular here, with the Department of Fixed Effects, I'm comparing within the same department, far right against the others, basically. So that this shouldn't be a bias because of that. So I'm comparing the same over time, yes. Are other questions? Or yeah.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes, please.
Yeah, this is really cool. So congratulations. I really love it. I guess that what I'm missing is a bit more of the underlying story, right? So what is going on under the scene? So one thing that I have in mind is, first, I would like to know whether this Pied Noir, actually, they have some characteristics of individuals who would vote for the far right, right? So what is the prototype of this Pied Noir? Are they less educated or not? Are there like sort of like potential voters of a far right party or not? The second question that I have is more like to understand better, or what do you think, is the far right in this context trying to be strategic and sort of like, okay, we are a minority party, right? And we have all these newcomers, so let's try to be like sympathize with them so that we can increase our vote share? Or are they sort of like seeing that people, like native people in France, they may be, some of them may be happy to welcome this Pied Noir and help them and so on, so they are trying to capture voters from them, or both the stories, right? So what is their true strategy and what is happening, right? So because I think this is important to extrapolate beyond this particular event, right? So that's it.
In terms of characteristics, that's the educational attainment. They are, let's say, slightly better educated than the natives, slightly. And if you want, you are also asked about if they could be more, let's say, associated with the far right. You can see that if you look at the jobs they are doing, basically 22% are in the public administration and in the army. These are the two summed. If you look at the 10% of them are in the army. And there is the idea that people of the army at the time had connection with far right movements, okay? In particular, some of these people had. And maybe, yeah, I can divide this. I can show you this and the army split, but yeah. But there are some characteristics that make you think that some of these people may be related to the far right. In terms of strategy of the far right, then, I would say it's not easy to answer the question for one specific reason. That is that for sure there is a strategic behavior of the far right saying, well, this is a new group of voters and we want to exploit this new group trying to get votes, okay? At the same time, if it is true what historians have claimed, that there was already an ideological bias in favor of the far right, then, you know, the things start to be slightly more blurred. It's more difficult to say it's only a strategy of the far right or it's more a, ideological position. In terms of the other people and how these people were, let's say, treated in France, there were a little bit of skepticism at the beginning, and in particular, there were people saying, "Well, all these guys are fascists, so we don't want them," basically. But still, I don't see, you know, any reaction against them in terms of voting for other parties, or at least not, you know, in the average. I only see this increase for the far right, which is likely to be driven by these people. And yeah, I hope my answer helped. I think Joel has a question.
Yeah, if I may jump in. Thank you for a very nice presentation. I'm sorry, my camera is on strike today. I had a question out of curiosity. Have you tried your regressions, but using the share of pro-independence votes in the referendum instead of the Pied Noir? So what I have in mind here is that this event or the independence of Algeria had, I mean, I guess many people in France had an opinion about that, and it's probably not something neutral, even not on the non-Pied Noir people. And so I was wondering how geographic heterogeneity could matter there. So whether there's regions who had more a closer link or a stronger opinion about this matter than others. And in particular, I want to relate that to the statement that you made in the very beginning of your presentation, which I found interesting, the helicopter allegory of dropping hundreds of thousands of voters. But I think it's important here to keep in mind that it's not really what happened in this case, because these people, on the one hand, were already politically active, so they could have representatives in France. And as I said, on the other hand, people in France probably also had an opinion or even interests linked to them. So I think it's a bit of a different setting than just assuming that you generate hundreds of thousands of new voters within a day.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. At the same time, it's true that, you know, this was completely unexpected in a certain sense, because they were not expecting that many. They were not expecting these people to move. So this is why I'm saying, it's like something which is sudden and unexpected. It's like dropping these people. What I tried to do was a robustness check where I basically summed the part of the vote against the Algerian independence with the vote for the far right in 58. So saying, let's say that some of these people vote in favor of the which voted in favor of, against the independence will vote for the far right. Are my results still robust? This is a robustness check that I tried to see, and the result were still there, were still robust, let's say. Mainly the point is that, that's.
Sorry, can you just repeat the robustness check? I didn't fully understand what you did with the far right. How did you link the far right to the referendum?
No, basically, I start with the far right distribution of votes in 58, and then I said, let's assume that to this initial distribution, some of the people who will be, who were against the Algerian independence will vote for the far right. And then I use this as an additional control, because the idea was, well, let's say that the natives are becoming more far right, even without the Pied Noir. Then can we still say that the results are robust to the Pied Noir arrival? That's basically.
I see. Okay.
I hope I explained it well.
Thanks.
Okay, there were other 3 questions, I think. Yes, sir.
Hello.
Hi.
Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just have a quick question for you. After the arrival of Pied Noir and the rise of these far-right political parties, how did it affect the volume and the patterns of immigration in general? In the years after, of course.
I haven't looked at that. I look at the fact that there are still that in the same areas that were not exactly in the same areas. Some of these areas were immigrants from Algeria arriving after that. That's for sure. But the inflow of immigrants from Algeria that I can see is in part in the south, in particular in the southeast, but also north. They also start to move to the northeast, which is areas where the Pied Noir did not move. And yeah, so in part yes, in part no, I would say.
I have a question about the long run effects of this exodus, because I suppose that to study long run effects, you need people to stay in the department where they arrived originally. So do you have some information about if they moved afterwards?
Sorry. No.
Okay.
Yeah, no, the issue with that is that you don't. So one thing that I did was, let's see if I have it here. Well, basically, this is with the far right. But one thing that I did, that I tried to do was to exploit the 1975 distribution. But you see, I am able to know if a person is a Pied Noir only because this person was born in Algeria, had the French citizenship, and entered in France. Sorry, was in Algeria in 62 and then and had the French citizenship and entered in France. So the problem is that the more, so if you go on, then you don't have those questions. So you may be able to identify people who are maybe born in Algeria, they had the French citizenship, but maybe are simply Algerian migrants who were able to get the citizenship. So it's difficult. So the one thing that I do was to do the analysis using my measure in 68. Then I use a measure in 75, which I can show is correlated like 99% to what I have, to the Pied Noir. But then probably if you go on like from 82, 86, I'm not that sure you can really have a good measure of it. So the way in which I'm doing long run is simply to look at those areas which were more exposed, see how those areas are going to vote, controlling for immigrants that enter in the same period. Because the main confounding factor in this case is the Front National from the 80s on will gain because of immigrants' arrival. So I wanted to control also for that. So the way in which I do this is simply, I can show you, I don't have it here, but basically it's simply my measure of PNR and then controlling for immigration that arrived in the same, in those years, the inflow of immigration in each consecutive census wave from the 80s on. But I don't know exactly the PNR in the long run, let's say. Also, some of them will have died, unfortunately. But still there is a survey in 2012 which look at that and is claiming that there are still 1 million people who consider themselves, strictly speaking, PNR, which is interesting because of the original 1 million. But then if you think of second generation, there's apparently 1 million people still think of themselves as PNR. Yes, Jesus has a question, maybe.
Hi, so very nice presentation, and thanks for the opportunity of asking more questions. So I would like to go back to the points that Joel and Martin already raised, which is the quantification of the effects. So I wanted you to dig a little bit deeper on that. So it's similar to the exercise that you did, but a bit different in the sense. What I would like to know, I can see two stories here. One would be the one that you seem to favor, which is that these guys who came back from Algeria are now voting for the far right. But there is the additional story that these guys coming from Algeria could be encouraging some type of sentiment in the local population, and is the local population who could be voting for the far right. So what I would like you to tell me about is about the quantification of your estimates. Whether the particular estimates that you have shown as elasticities, if I understand correctly, but if you translate that into votes, would you be able to rule out any of these two stories?
Not completely. So I cannot, because votes are unobservable. So I cannot exactly say how much of it is one or the other. What I can show you is that. Where is it? What I can show you is that if you look at the turnout, for example, before the arrival of these people, if you look at the 1962 referendum on the Algerian independence, I don't see an increase. So the idea is, if these people here were really, against the goal, in favor of the far right, I should observe these people to vote, or they vote more, and I don't see this. So in those areas, if you look at 1958 to the referendum 1962, turnout did not increase, and then it increased later on, when these people actually arrived. Clearly, so this means that, let's say, the results are likely to be driven partially by these people. Clearly, I cannot tell you exactly how much of one, how much is it, unfortunately, because this is, as I said, is unobservable. There may be a way to translate like from aggregate to individual in some way, doing some calculations, but I'm still thinking if there is a way of doing it. I know that, yeah, it's not as, it's difficult. And
thank you.
Possible. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, no, I had the same concern as Jesus. And then I was thinking maybe whether there are different variations that you can exploit. So you're kind of looking at the share of Pied Noir in these different regions. And can you disentangle with those that are eligible and those areas that got a lot of Algerians that probably either are below the voting age or didn't have the French nationality, that hence they cannot vote. And that might be giving you a sense of whether in those areas where there are actually people voting versus those areas that received migrants, but they cannot vote as much, it gives you a sense of which channel is more at play. Yeah, I don't know if that's something that could
I can try. Yeah, I was, because that's a question I've been asked a lot, but it's not easy to answer. One thing I also can add is that I show you this falsification using turnout. I can also show you using votes. So you see that in those areas, votes increase. So if votes increase, then you should expect that when these people, and interestingly, I find that for one Pied Noir who enters, I observe like a 0.8 increase in the number of votes. So roughly, but still, yes. Yeah, maybe I can work with, yeah, I can maybe look at the eligible voters and then maybe even look at single votes. And
what I propose to do, I see that there's still some more questions. I'm just going to present the next week's presenter, and then we can go back to the discussion. So those who want to stay back to discuss with Edoardo, please do so. We'll promote you to the panelist in a second. So I'm super happy to announce that we're going to have the next session dedicated to a junior speaker again on the 8th of December by Selina Gamb from University of Freiburg. And she's going to present a project on how resident permits affect labor market attachments of foreign workers. So, I mean, by now you all know that you can register as panelists and have the chance to interact more with the speaker during the presentation if you sign up before Tuesday and specifically say that you want to be part of the panelists. And of course, Edoardo is going to receive all the questions that has been asked throughout the presentation. We also welcome you to send out your papers if you want to present to the junior seminar to our email address, and you can see all the details of the upcoming seminars on our website. So thank you all for your participation today. We had a very nice presentation, a very nice and cool job market paper, Edoardo. Congratulations on that. And you can stay back for those who want to discuss with us. We're going to have some more time for that.
Yeah, sure.